In the quiet coal mining town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, there stands a roadside memorial. It is not a grave, for there are no bodies buried beneath it. Instead, it is a silent testament to a mystery that has haunted a family and an entire community for nearly 80 years. It is a question carved into stone and memory. How can 5 children vanish from a burning house in the middle of the night, leaving behind not a single bone, not a scrap of clothing, and no trace of their existence? It was Christmas Eve, 1945, a time for celebration, for family, for peace. But for the Sodder family, it would become the beginning of a nightmare that defies explanation to this day. This is the story of the Sodder children. George and Jenny Sodder were hard-working Italian immigrants who had built a life for themselves in the hills of West Virginia. George owned a successful trucking company, and despite the ongoing war, the family was thriving. They had 10 children in total, 5 sons and 5 daughters. By December 1945, the older children had grown up and moved on, leaving 5 still living at home. They were a close-knit family, but in the weeks leading up to Christmas, a series of strange incidents had unsettled George Sodder. It began with a stranger appearing at his front door. The man was asking for hauling work, but he walked to the back of the house, ostensibly to look at a truck, and instead began pointing at the fuse boxes and the electricity, making a disturbingly specific prediction. He told George that his house was going to burn down and that his children were going to be destroyed. George, a proud man, dismissed him as just another drifter. But shortly after, another strange car was seen parked near the property, with the passengers watching the Sodder children as they walked home from school. Then, just days before Christmas, one of the older sons found a banana on the lawn. In the 1940s, in the mountains of West Virginia, bananas were a rare and expensive import. It was an odd, out-of-place detail that felt like a warning, but the family had no way of knowing what was coming. Christmas Eve was festive. The 9 children who were still at home were excited, though their parents had insisted they wait until Christmas morning to open their presents. Around 10 p.m., Marion, the oldest daughter who was still living there, took the younger ones upstairs to bed. George and Jenny followed shortly after, retreating to their bedroom downstairs. The house was quiet until the telephone rang in the middle of the night. It was around 12:30 a.m. Jenny woke up to answer it, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. A woman was laughing, asking for a name that Jenny didn't recognize. She told her she had the wrong number and hung up. As she drifted back to sleep, she heard a thump on the roof. It sounded like a heavy ball rolling. Then the sound of something hitting the pavement outside. Assuming it was just the children, or maybe the weather, she went back to sleep. An hour later, at roughly 1 a.m., Jenny woke again. This time, the smell of smoke was unmistakable. It hung thick in the air. She woke George, shouting that the house was on fire. George rushed to the hallway. The flames weren't coming from the kitchen or the furnace. They were roaring from the office space located in the rear of the house, near the stairs. He ran upstairs to get the children, but the stairway was already engulfed in a wall of searing heat. He couldn't get up. He ran back to grab his wife and the 2 boys who were sleeping in the basement. They managed to escape through a window, but the fire was spreading with terrifying speed. Outside in the freezing winter air, the family screamed for the children trapped inside. George could see the faces of his daughters Martha and Jenny in the upstairs windows. They were panicked, crying for help. Desperate, George ran to the side of the house to grab his truck, intending to ram it into the exterior wall to create a ramp or an opening for the children to jump. He gunned the engine, but it wouldn't start. He had just driven it the day before. It was in perfect condition, yet now, nothing. The panic was absolute. They used a ladder leaning against the side of the house to try to reach the windows, but when they reached for it, it was gone. It had been moved. They tried to fill water buckets, but the water was frozen in the winter frost. Within minutes, the roof collapsed, the windows shattered. The voices of the children went silent. The neighbors watched helplessly as the fire consumed the Sodder home, turning it into a pile of smoldering ash. By morning, the house was gone. The fire department had arrived late, and by the time they got there was nothing left to do but spray water on the ruins. The sad parents stood in the gray dawn, their hearts shattered. But as the embers cooled, a horrific realization began to set in. A realization that would turn grief into suspicion. Typically, a house fire that claims the lives of its occupants leaves a grim reality. Bones, teeth, fragments of jewelry. It is a gruesome fact of forensic science that fire does not consume everything. George and Jenny waited for the coroner to arrive. They waited for the bodies of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty to be pulled from the rubble. But the search turned up nothing. No bones, no remains. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, convened a coroner's jury the very next day. After only an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. They stated that the 5 children had perished in the fire due to faulty wiring and that the remains had been completely incinerated by the fire. The Sodders did not accept this. They had no medical evidence, no confirmation, just an assumption. George Sodder knew that his children were gone, but his instincts told him they had not died in that fire. And as he began to sift through the ruins, he found things that supported his darkest fears. In the debris, George Sodder found the fuse box. It had been pulled from the wall. The wires were cut. This was not a faulty electrical fire. It was sabotage. Then came the stranger revelations. When George went to report his findings to the fire chief, Morris admitted something disturbing. He said that when he arrived at the scene, he had found a human organ in the ashes. He claimed it was a heart and that he had buried it on the site. The Sodders demanded it be exhumed and examined to a pathologist. The test results came back. It was a beef liver. It had never been human. Why would a fire chief bury a piece of beef liver and claim it was a victim's heart? As the family investigated, they recalled the events of that night. The phone call that woke Jenny, a wrong number,
or a signal to someone inside.
The thump on the roof
was someone
throwing dynamite. Why didn't the truck start? Why was the ladder missing? A taxi driver from nearby Montgomery came forward with a chilling account. He claimed that on the night of the fire, shortly after 1 a.m., he was one throwing something onto the side
property. Then he saw the fire start. He said he had seen the
children in a car passing his taxi as he drove towards Fayetteville that morning. He saw them peering out of the windows of a vehicle as it sped away. The Saudis became obsessed with finding the truth. They hired private investigators and followed every lead, no matter how faint. The prevailing theory became that the children had been kidnapped.
George Sodder was
a vocal critic of the Italian dictator Mussolini during the war. Some in the town, particularly those in the local Italian community, had threatened him for his views. He feared that the fire was a retaliation or a cover for a kidnapping orchestrated by the Mafia. For years, the Sodders chased rumors. In 1947, a woman in Florida wrote to them. She was a tourist at a hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. She claimed to have seen the 5 children having dinner with 4 adults, all of Italian descent, at the hotel. She said the children were well dressed but appeared tired and sad. When she tried to speak to the man supervising them, he rebuffed her. She noted that the woman with them was reading a West Virginia newspaper and that the family was avoiding contact with other guests. The Soviets rushed to Charleston, but the group had already checked out. Other Soviets trickled in throughout the years, from New York to Texas. A photo arrived in the mail in the late 1960s, postmarked from Kentucky. It showed a young man in his early 20s bearing a striking resemblance to Louis Sodder. On the back was a handwritten note: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. I lil boys, A93132. The family investigated the return address and the code, but the trail went cold. It was just another ghost in the machine. George Sodder spent the rest of his life standing guard over what remained of his home. He erected a billboard on Route 16 offering a reward for information, displaying the photos of his 5 missing children. He lived there until he died in 1969. Jenny Sodder kept vigil until her passing in 1989. Despite the strange evidence, the sightings, and the lack of physical remains, the official stance of law enforcement never changed. The state fire marshal officially closed the case in the 1950s, maintaining that the children perished in the fire. But the questions remain. Where were the bones? Who tampered with the truck and the phones? Who cut the fuse box? And if they died, who was the woman in Charleston? Who was the young man in the photo? The house is gone now. The billboard is gone. But the emptiness left behind is absolute. 5 children went to sleep on Christmas Eve and vanished from the face of the earth. This case remains unsolved. To this day,